In this video, we're going to talk about graphing radical functions. So let's say we have y equals square root of x. How would the graph of that look like? Well, let's come up with the x and y table. And let's plug in 0. When x equals 0, what's the value of y? Is 0. What about 1? Square root of 1 is 1. Now 2 is not a nice number because you'll get irrational number. What about 4? Square root of 4 is 2. And square root of 9 will be 3. Square root of 16 will be 4. Now notice, if you put a negative number here, you get an imaginary. So negative 1, negative 1.5. Any negative number for x, the y does not exist. So the graph of y equals radical x will look something like this. That is a graph of y equals radical x. And notice there's no graph on the left side of 0 because when you plug in negative x value inside the radical, the values do not exist. What about the graph of cube root of x? Well, let's make the x and y table again. Let's plug some values. When x equals 0, y value will be 0. What about 1? Cube root of 1 is 1. Now, since the index is odd, it's okay to have negative inside the radical. So cube root of negative 1 will be negative 1. Cube root of 8 is 2. Cube root of negative 8 is negative 2. And so forth. You could have more points if you like. Now, how does that graph look like? Well, if you plot those points, it's going to look something like this. Of course, you could get a better graph using Desmos or graphing calculator. So this is the graph of y equals cube root of x. If you have f of x equals radical x, and g of x equals radical quantity x minus 3 plus 4, how does this graph of g of x will look like compared to f of x? Well, you know that you're going to have a horizontal shift, 3 to the right, and vertical shift, 4 up. It's very similar to graphing transformation of quadratic equations. So how does that graph look like, radical x? It looks like something like this, right? So now what's going to happen is you're going to move 3 to the right, 1, 2, 3, and you got to move up 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So there's your g of x compared to f of x. What if you have g of x equals negative radical x? Well, this is going to be opposite of f of x in terms of y values. So x-axis will be the reflection line. And when you fold let's say this is a paper, when you fold it along the x-axis, these two graphs have to overlap. So the negative radical x will look something like this. Okay, it's the opposite of f of x in terms of using the x-axis as a reflection line. So this is a positive radical x, and this is negative radical x. If you want to graph 1 over 2 times y squared equals x using your graphing calculator, what you need to do is you need to solve for y. By the way, if on Desmos, you could just type this in and it will graph for you. Unfortunately, we cannot use Desmos on the AP exam. So if you're planning to take AP exam, you need to know how to use graphing calculator. So let's multiply both sides by 2. You get y squared equals 2x. And how do you solve for y? You have to square root both sides. So you end up getting positive, negative, radical 2x. So you are going to have two y's. So y, let's call it y1 equals radical 2x. And y2 equals negative radical 2x. You need y1 and y2 when you want to graph using graphing calculator. So you actually have to graph two graphs in order to graph this equation. So when you do so, y1 will look something like this. Okay, you could go ahead and try with your graphing calculator. And then what is y2? It's opposite of radical 2x, which is going to be this portion right here. That's going to be y2. So it looks like a parabola, but it opens up towards the right. And this is not a function. Notice it does not pass the vertical line test. So this is not a function. All right, you have x squared plus y squared equals 16. And we need to graph this using graphing calculator. Again, this is so easy with decimals. Because all you need to is just type that and it will give you a circle. By the way, you guys remember that this is a circle from geometry, where the center is 0, 0, and the radius is 4, because square root of 16 will be 4. Now, how would you graph this using graphing calculator? You have to solve for y. In order to do so, we have to subtract x squared both sides. You get y squared equals 16 minus x squared. And then to solve for y, you got to take square root of positive, negative, square root of 16 minus x squared. So again, your y1 will be radical 16 minus x squared. And then your y2 will be radical negative radical 16 minus x squared. So you got to graph both y1 and y2 to get the graph of x squared plus y squared equals 16. So when you do so, y1 will look like a semicircle that is above the x-axis. Why? Because y values are positive. Y values are positive for y1. What about y2? Y2 will be the semicircle that is below the x-axis, because y2, the y values are negative. So, I mean, this is not the best circle, but you'll see what I mean when you graph these two lines using graphing calculator.